tests, the risk of quadruple when they have peer-age passengers. And we know that this law in other countries, such as Canada, has reduced deaths in younger drivers since 1995, 86%, and in every other country up to 40%. So I just think it's common sense. And I think the fact that a government roads minister, themselves said that they used to advise their own children not to take lifts speaks volumes. But I think it's also when she said, as parents we make assessments, etc. I find that, it's doesn't really make sense when actually, you look at the neuroscience of teenagers. We're not always in full control of what we're being told by teenagers, and stopping your child from getting into a car with another young driver is not always possible.
Yeah, you Crystal, you want the law essentially to back you up as a parent, don't you? Stay with us, Crystal. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm just going to speak to our panel now. Crystal was referring to Lilian Greenwood, the roads minister there. Neil, can I just get your opinion of
what me and Tay wanted to do was take you through a logical process in this video where you're going to see stuff that you have absolutely no clue as to what's coming with AI or the impact it's going to have on the workforce.
One of the jobs I did was as a working trauma care just down the road at the Queen Elizabeth Hospital. I saw far too many people's lives either being destroyed or lost because of accidents on the road.
I've read through a decade of your research to figure out what the best investment is, so anyone can get rich in the future, and you predicted that this will grow by at least 5,000%.
Because they sound good on paper, but they are underpinned by evidence base. I think that's really important. We need to be led by the evidence on how we make our roads safer. And I think one of the big things that's missing for me in this particular strategy is the enforcement part. Because we do know things like drug driving, for example, uninsured driving, reckless riding, etc., are the biggest factors to injuries and deaths on the road. And I didn't feel there was enough within this strategy on how we were going to enforce that on a devolved level opposed to centralising it.
Okay, Manuela, what do you think of this strategy?
So we welcome any measure that improves road safety. I personally would like to see graduating licenses personally, because I've met with parents from my constituency that have lost children in horrific collisions and accidents. What I would say though, that any road safety strategy should also be accompanied by improvement in sustainable transport infrastructure, in particular in rural areas where we have isolated communities where very dangerous roads with poor visibility. I want to see better local bus transport. Yes.
Alex, can I get you to respond? I mean, essentially, I've not gone far enough here.
So road safety is something that is really close to my heart on the A456 in my constituency.
Hi, Anik. Thank you. So,
period. And I think there are 30 people like that are killed every single month. So anything that we can do to bear down on fatalities and serious injuries on the roads is a good thing.
What about the
here's how it works. Let me introduce.
So I think it's important to have a balance. So there are lots of things the government has suggested here that are very sensible to reduce the chance of young people having accidents, including a longer period between doing their theory test and doing their actual practical test. I think
a decade of your research to figure out what the best investment is, and anyone can get rich in the future. And you predicted that this will grow by at least 5,000%.
Particularly in areas. Crystal, we don't have long, but just what do you say to those kind of arguments? You yourself live in Shropshire. What about those young people for whom their car is a lifeline?
This is the most frustrating argument, that it's not stopping them from driving, it's just stopping them taking their peer-age passengers for a short space of time. The biggest restriction on any young person is the loss of life, and they are, the most at-risk age group. What other area of life where post-test or qualification is somebody who's responsible for other lives not given extra restrictions after the test? There is not a single area in life we are putting the children who are the most at risk. They're 3.5 times more likely, excluding the over 80s, to kill or seriously injure others on the road. And there's laws in place for drinking, for loads of things to protect young people. And this is the biggest killer of young people in our country. Okay. Why is the government allowing this to happen, and how are they going to feel when they are going to be exposed to the deaths in their veins?
Crystal, I know your campaign will go on. Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate your time and wish you the very best. That's Crystal Owen, whose son Harvey sadly lost his life in a car accident in 2023. We're going to move on now, and parents and teachers are calling on the government to reverse changes to special educational needs funding, calling it a backward step. Ministers have promised tens of thousands of extra school places over the next 3 years by investing in mainstream schools. But the policy shift has led to several planned new special schools being cancelled. Here's our Herefordshire and Worcestershire political reporter, Tom Edwards.
Finishing an 18-mile round trip to school. Just a normal day for 13-year-old Kira, who's being dropped off home in a taxi.
Do you remember getting your hair done? I think it
Kira's autistic. For the last 3 years, she's been travelling from her home in Evesham to an independent specialist school in Dudley, and Mum is frustrated at the lack of local options.
We looked around the whole county and there were no schools that met her EHCP needs. It's hugely frustrating. I don't want my child travelling in a taxi with people she doesn't know, people she's not comfortable with. They have every right to get the same.
If you want to alcohol free, but
to create extra 50,000 school places for people with special educational needs. Many will be in units and mainstream schools, and now some proposed new special schools are in doubt. Over in Herefordshire, a proposed free school has been cancelled altogether, as well as 3 others in Walsall, Stoke-on-Trent and Solihull. Instead, the councils are taking millions to expand existing provision.
Well, it was extremely frustrating from our point of
today
view
I'm
because
looking for
this funding
anybody
that
interested in me.
is funding towards augmenting mainstream schools. You want lots of children to experience mainstream schooling, but unfortunately, there are some children with complex needs that are so severe that only a specialist facility can cope with them.
The James School has sites in Hereford and Ross-on-Wye, where they educate neurodivergent children. Staff here fear mainstream schools will struggle if they're expected to take in more pupils with special educational needs.
There are some children that it will never work for because the environment is not right. It may be too overwhelming. And I also think that what will happen is that teachers will become overwhelmed because they will not have the level of training that
I read through a decade of your research to figure out what the best investment is, so anyone can get rich.
Money and not about the children.
The Department for Education says that £5 billion will end a postcard lottery that SEND families face, creating extra places in mainstream schools far faster than could be done by building new schools. But the government's wider strategy on special education needs has been pushed back until later this year.
Okay, that's Tom Edwards with that report. Joining us now is Jade Barrow-Hill from Kidderminster, a former special needs teacher who now campaigns on the issue and also has a daughter who is on the autistic spectrum. So Jade, your daughter is in a mainstream school. She has specialist provision. Does that work for her?
Yes and no. It's a very fragile situation. Sometimes it's working, sometimes it's not. She has a diagnosis and she has an EHCP. She has implemented one-to-one support. And even with all those things in place for her, it's still at times like we're in right now, we're in a burnout right now, and she hasn't been able to access school for part of this week. So it's constantly living our life on eggshells, not knowing what the next day or the next week's going to bring.
And what do you make of the government's policy on more places, more special education places in the mainstream setting, but perhaps fewer specialist schools? What do you think of that?
There's always going to be place for alternative provisions and specialist schools. So we already don't have enough of them as it is. So it's really disappointing to hear the U-turn. And there's mixed opinions with mainstream schools because one is that it's the inclusion by exclusion. So children may struggle with an environment and can go to SEND, but when you've got right daughter, for example, who goes into the medical school and sees resources in the SEN unit that will really benefit, that she'll be accessing daily, which is all written in her EHCP, but she can't utilise some of that and can't access that to the schools. That has to be prioritised to children.
Yeah. Jade, what's you? Yeah, I get your point. Thank you so much. Stay with us, Jade. Jade's actually disappointed by this. Fewer specialist schools.
I think we all appreciate the SEND system that we have at the moment is inadequate. In fact, the shadow education consultative said that their party had let it down and they should hang their heads in shame to say that it was left to us. What we've done here is announce £3 billion in addition.
All I'm getting on my taping is fucking television.
Because not all those schools will be open as they were. And that will support a lot of places inside mainstream schools. So when I speak to teachers and parents in Halesowen, they are not generally happy with the SEND system at the moment, but they do appreciate having a school that is close to them, that their children can access. Those schools
fucking may as well. I may as well.
That's SEND education to have.
Okay, are you happy?
On Tamworth Lane in my constituency.
It's a new specialist
school. And I know that parents were hoping that was going to be a real opportunity to provide the provision for those group and that cohort of pupils who have those more complex needs and would really benefit from that. So I'm personally disappointed with the announcement. Look, it's clear that the SEND system is in crisis in this country. That has not just happened overnight. That's been a series of government decisions of both stripes. Let's be very honest about this. But we've got to make sure we're getting it right for these young people who deserve so much better.
Manuela.
Inclusive education is, it's a step in the right direction, but expanding school places without resources, without having highly trained staff, teaching assistants, speech and language therapists.
So you're in favour of the mainstream places in schools? You don't think it's wrong that the specialist schools are being cancelled?
The specialist schools should not be scrapped or cancelled because there are children that will need those schools, and if they are scrapped, then communities are not, parents, carers, communities are not going to have those options.
We're not scrapping specialist schools. There's a number of schools that were planned, like the one in Solihull, where we're now looking for alternative funding arrangements.
Okay.
But we're providing more funding for mainstream schools to do that education.
Okay. Very quickly, Jay, because we've only got a few seconds. What's your 10-second message to government?
Until the mainstream environment and the curriculum is adapted to be fully inclusive, then this is always going to be an ongoing problem.
Okay, all right. And indeed, I know the stress on teachers